I sat at the far end of the table, the silverware gleaming like judgment under candlelight, the casserole dish cooling untouched beside me. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. His wife's wine glass caught the glow of the chandelier, polished and empty, like her smile. When I reached for a story, something simple, something warm, his voice cut through the silence. Just eat, Mom. Don't start a story. 40 years of sacrifice, of scraped knees and second jobs, of loving him past every apology. And now, my stories weren't welcome in the house they were built for. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The snow on the cul-de-sac gleamed like polished glass, untouched except for one set of tire tracks. Hers. Marilyn parked in front of the sprawling new house, the kind that looked more like a model home than a place where people actually lived. Through the window, warm light spilled over a granite island and shimmered off metallic ornaments. She could already see Emily moving briskly around the kitchen in a cream sweater that probably cost more than Marilyn's winter coat. Marilyn sat for a moment in the car, watching her breath fog the windshield. She adjusted the silk scarf Jason had given her 3 Christmases ago, back when gifts still came with hugs instead of text receipts. Then she gathered her casserole, the one dish she still made from scratch, and walked to the front door. Jason opened it before she could knock. "Hey, Mom." His tone was polite but clipped, like a customer service rep on his last call of the day. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart," she said, smiling up at him. "It smells wonderful." "Yeah, Emily went all out this year." He stepped aside but didn't touch the casserole she offered. "We're just about to start." The house was perfect. Polished floors, neutral walls, no trace of fingerprints. It smelled faintly of cinnamon-scented candles and lemon cleaner. Marilyn followed him into the dining room where the table gleamed with crystal and white linen. There was no clutter, no laughter, just the faint hum of a playlist meant to sound festive. Emily looked up from her phone long enough to flash a tight smile. "Marilyn, so glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," Marilyn said softly, taking her seat at the far end of the table. For a few moments, the only sound was the clink of utensils and the quiet buzz of notifications. Jason's teenage stepson from Emily's first marriage scrolled on his phone, the screen glow flickering across his face. The turkey was perfect, the wine rich, and yet everything tasted like cardboard. Marilyn glanced at Jason, remembering Thanksgivings in their tiny duplex, how he used to say grace with his eyes squeezed shut, how she'd pretend not to notice when he took the last dinner roll just to make her laugh. She missed that boy. The man across from her now seemed to have forgotten he ever existed. She reached for her water glass. "You know," she began, her voice warm but tentative, "this reminds me of the year you were 8, Jason. You made a turkey out of—" Jason's fork hit his plate with a sharp clink. "Just eat, Mom. Don't start a story." The air shifted. Emily kept her eyes on her wine glass, swirling it slowly. The boy looked up, curious, then went back to his phone. The room seemed to shrink around Marilyn, every sound amplified. The tick of the thermostat, the faint scrape of silverware, the pulse in her ears. "Oh," she said after a beat. "Of course." She smiled faintly, folding her napkin into her lap. Her hands trembled only a little. She chewed, swallowed, smiled again when someone passed the cranberries. The conversation turned to stock portfolios, home renovations, flights to Aspen. She listened, nodding in the right places, but the words washed over her like static. The longer she sat there, the clearer it became. She wasn't family tonight. She was an obligation with a casserole dish. When Jason asked Emily to pass the salt, Marilyn's fork slipped and scraped against her plate. The sound echoed like a protest, but no one reacted. She looked down at the slice of turkey on her plate, perfectly cooked, cooling in gravy she could no longer taste. She wanted to tell him that story, not to embarrass him, but to remind him of the Thanksgiving when their oven broke and they ate sandwiches on the couch while watching cartoons. The year he said, "When I grow up, I'll buy you the biggest turkey in the world, Mom." She wondered if he remembered saying that. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing snow against the windows. Marilyn reached for her glass, her reflection trembling in the crystal. Her eyes looked older than she remembered, but steadier too. By dessert, her voice had faded completely from the table. Emily praised the pie from the caterer. Jason joked about work. And Marilyn smiled through all of it, quiet, pleasant, invisible. When the plates were cleared, she thanked them for dinner and gathered her empty casserole dish. As she stood by the door, Jason glanced at his phone again. "Drive safe, okay?" "I always do," she said. The night air bit at her cheeks as she stepped outside. Snowflakes melted in her hair, catching the porch light like tiny sparks. She paused halfway to her car, gripping the dish in both hands. From inside, laughter drifted through the glass, muffled, distant. Marilyn looked up at the window, then at the dark sky above. Her breath came out in a pale cloud, and for the first time that evening, she let her smile drop. She whispered to no one, "All right then." Then she opened her car door, set the dish on the seat beside her, and drove away into the falling snow. Silent, steady, and thinking of all the things she'd never said. The house was silent when Marilyn stepped inside, the kind of silence that feels earned. She hung her coat on the hook beside the door and stood there for a moment, her breath soft in the dim entryway. The casserole dish was still warm against her palm, the last trace of a dinner that had tasted like nothing. She set it down on the counter, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and looked around the kitchen. Tiny, cozy, worn. A magnet from the animal shelter. A note from her church bake sale. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she went to the hallway closet and knelt, tugging out the old cardboard box labeled in her handwriting, 1992. The tape was yellowed, corners caved in from years of being shuffled deeper into the dark. She carried it to the dining table and brushed off a layer of dust. When she peeled the flaps open, a faint smell of paper and time rose up, tinged with detergent from the clothes it had once shared space with. Inside were fragments of a life she'd worked hard to build. Folded school papers, crayon drawings, the stub of a rent receipt, a photograph curled at the edges. She lifted one drawing first, Jason's handwriting uneven, the letters of "I love you, Mom," slanted across the page. A stick figure boy with huge arms and a red smile. Her throat tightened. Below it, a manila envelope. She opened it to find an eviction notice. The one from that winter when the furnace had broken and she'd slept in her coat beside Jason to keep him warm. She remembered the way he'd whispered, "We'll be fine, Mom. I'll help you when I'm big." Marilyn pressed the edge of the paper flat, smoothing out a crease that had never really gone away. She kept going. There were pay stubs from her job at the diner, 4 shifts a week, then 6. A photo of her in a polyester uniform, her hair pinned back, eyes tired but determined. Another of Jason at his 2nd birthday, sitting at their chipped kitchen table with 2 candles stuck into a bowl of boxed mac and cheese. He was grinning, cheese on his chin, proud of the tiny paper crown she'd cut from a cereal box. Marilyn sat back, letting the memories roll through her like the tide. Sharp, slow, unstoppable. The doorbell rang. She startled, wiping her eyes quickly before answering. Susan stood there in her church parka, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa from the gas station down the street. "Figured you might need something sweet," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. Marilyn smiled faintly. "You always know when to appear." Psychic power, Susan said dryly. Then she noticed the open box. Oh Lord, are we diving into the archives? Marilyn chuckled softly. Guess I was just remembering. They sat side by side at the table, leafing through the pile. Susan held up the photo of little Jason with his macaroni crown. He looks like a prince of powdered cheese, she said. Marilyn laughed, a small, broken sound. That night, we had $10 between us. He told me it was the best birthday he ever had. Susan looked at her, expression softening. And now he eats in a house big enough to get lost in. Marilyn nodded slowly. He forgot what built that house he lives in. Her voice was calm, not bitter. But there was an iron thread beneath it. Susan leaned back, folding her arms. Then maybe it's time you reminded him. Marilyn glanced up, curious. How? Not with another story, Susan said, eyes narrowing with that familiar spark. With a signature. Something he'll actually have to read. The words hung in the air. Marilyn turned her gaze toward the box, at all the faded papers that had once meant survival. A new thought began to take shape, quiet, steady, deliberate. She reached for one of the envelopes, tracing the worn paper with her thumb. The sound of the furnace kicking on filled the room, a low hum beneath the flicker of the kitchen light. I kept all of this, she murmured, almost to herself. Every proof that I mattered. Susan took a sip of cocoa, watching her carefully. Maybe it's time he learns that again. On paper he can't ignore. Marilyn looked up, her expression unreadable but sharper than before. The faint tremor that had followed her since dinner was gone. Then we'll need a good pen, she said softly. Susan smiled. I've got one that doesn't run out of ink. Outside, the snow started falling again, thicker this time, covering the mailbox, the sidewalk, the past. Inside, Marilyn closed the box gently, as if sealing a promise. And somewhere between memory and resolve, she felt the first flicker of warmth return to her hands. The downtown streets of Indianapolis shimmered with slush, the kind of gray winter light that made even glass buildings look tired. Marilyn's wipers squeaked against her windshield as she turned into the parking lot of Kerr and Associates, Estate Law. The name sounded too large for the modest two-story brick building, its windows lined with frost. She sat for a moment before getting out, watching the condensation form on her side mirror. Her reflection looked back. Calm, careful, unfamiliar. She adjusted her scarf, the same one she'd worn at Thanksgiving, and whispered under her breath, "No stories today." The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and toner. A young receptionist smiled mechanically. "Appointment for Ms. Grant?" "Yes, with Ms. Kerr," Marilyn said. Her voice was soft but steady. Angela Kerr appeared a moment later, tall, brisk, and unsentimental, the kind of woman who didn't waste syllables. Her gray suit was pressed within an inch of its life, her hair clipped short and sharp. "Mrs. Grant," she greeted, extending a hand. "Come in." The office was lined with file cabinets and certificates, but there were small touches. A candle on the credenza, a stack of novels on the windowsill. Marilyn noticed one title, The Art of Silence. They sat across a polished mahogany desk. Angela slid a folder toward her. "You mentioned you wanted to review your will." Marilyn nodded, placing her purse on her lap. "It's been the same for years. Everything goes to my son." Angela flipped open the file, scanning quickly. Jason Grant, executor, sole beneficiary, straightforward. She looked up. "Do you still want it that way?" Marilyn hesitated, folding her hands together. The silence between them stretched like thread. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading into nothing. "I've realized," she said slowly, "that silence can say more than a speech. I'd like to change it." Angela leaned back in her chair, studying her. "Change it how?" Marilyn took a breath. I want to be heard, without saying a word. Something flickered in Angela's eyes, a brief, amused understanding. She nodded once, businesslike. Then let's make sure what you don't say is written loud and clear. For the next hour, they went line by line: assets, accounts, property. Angela's pen scratched across paper with measured precision, the rhythm like the ticking of a distant clock. Marilyn answered every question carefully, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. When they reached the final clause, burial wishes, Angela looked up. Any particular instructions? Marilyn thought for a moment. Just that my resting place be quiet, peaceful, no grand gestures. She smiled faintly. I've had enough noise for one lifetime. Angela jotted it down, her pen catching the light. You'd be surprised how many people find peace in paper. It's the only thing that stays honest. Marilyn studied her, intrigued. You like your work, don't you? Angela smirked. I do. Especially when the story behind it isn't as dull as it looks. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. And this one? Angela set down her pen, meeting her gaze. Quiet revenge, she said, her tone almost conspiratorial. That's my favorite genre. For the first time that morning, Marilyn laughed, a low, genuine laugh that startled even her. Then I suppose I came to the right author. Angela's smile widened just enough to show approval. We'll have the drafts ready by next week. I'll make sure everything is airtight. As Marilyn stood to leave, she ran a hand along the edge of the desk, feeling the cool, clean surface beneath her fingertips. There was something liberating about it, the certainty of ink, the permanence of intention. Angela handed her a thin envelope. This copy's for you. Keep it somewhere safe. It's the start of a new story. Marilyn tucked it into her purse. One I won't have to tell out loud, she said quietly. Outside, the wind had sharpened, flurries swirling across the lot. Marilyn stepped into the cold, pulling her coat tight. The traffic lights blinked red against the white-gray sky, and the city hummed around her, indifferent, alive. As she crossed to her car, she thought of Jason's table, the laughter through the glass, the words that had silenced her. Now she realized she didn't need his permission to speak. She unlocked the car, slid the envelope onto the passenger seat, and watched it for a moment. It looked small, harmless, yet it pulsed with quiet power. Her breath fogged the glass as she whispered, "You wanted me quiet, Jason. Let's see how that sounds in writing." Then she started the engine, the hum steady beneath her hands, and drove off into the cold morning, toward the first act of her unspoken revenge. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line, Christmas plans. It was from Emily, short, punctual, a single paragraph that felt like an obligation disguised as kindness. We're hosting Christmas dinner again this year. If you'd like to come, please RSVP by the 15th so I can plan the seating. Marilyn read it twice. No warmth? No, we'd love to have you. Just logistics, like she was being added to a guest list instead of a family gathering. She sipped her coffee, the steam fogging her glasses. On the table lay the draft of her updated will, the ink still smelling faintly of fresh resolve. She picked up her phone and began typing. Thank you, Emily. I'll be traveling this year. Wishing you both a wonderful Christmas. Her thumb hovered over send for a long moment. Then she pressed it. Less than a minute later, the reply buzzed through. No worries. We'll manage. Marilyn smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Of course you will, she thought. You've been managing me out of your lives for years. She closed the laptop and looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and relentless. The kind that blurred edges made everything look gentler than it was. By Christmas Eve, the church hall was alive with motion and laughter. Folding tables were lined with trays of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and pies donated by local bakeries. Children ran between the pews, the scent of cinnamon and pine heavy in the air. Marilyn stood beside Susan, both of them wearing matching red aprons that said, "Serve with joy." Susan had scrawled joy over with a Sharpie and written caffeine instead. "You're supposed to ladle, not eavesdrop," Susan teased as Marilyn glanced toward the door every few minutes. "I'm not eavesdropping," Marilyn said, smiling faintly. "I'm just listening." "To what?" "The kind of noise I don't mind being part of." They worked side by side, passing plates, refilling cocoa, trading small jokes with the regulars. For the first time in weeks, Marilyn's chest felt light. There was no tension here, no carefully curated politeness, just people who saw her as she was, someone trying, showing up, mattering. As the crowd thinned, Reverend Thomas approached, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat. He'd been her pastor since Jason was a boy, had baptized him even. "Marilyn," he said, his voice warm as a wool coat. "You've been here every year, but tonight you look different." She blinked. "Different?" He smiled. "Peaceful." She hesitated, the word catching her off guard. "I suppose I'm learning that peace isn't quiet. It's choosing where you want to listen." He nodded, touched her shoulder. "You have more family here than you know." For a moment she almost believed him. Later, after cleanup, she lingered by the window as the volunteers trickled out into the cold. Across the street, Christmas lights flickered in uneven strands, bright against the dark. She could see her reflection faintly in the glass. Older, yes, but still steady. Susan joined her, pulling on her gloves. "You thinking about them?" Marilyn didn't answer right away. "Jason used to love Christmas Eve. We'd stay up wrapping gifts until midnight, even if there was only one to wrap." "And now?" Marilyn's phone buzzed. She opened it instinctively. Jason's post filled the screen. A photo of him and Emily at their dinner table. Perfect lighting, perfect smiles, crystal wine glasses catching the glow of the chandelier. Caption: "Grateful for family, blessings, and the good life." There was no mention of her. Not even a mom's casserole, the one thing she'd once been famous for. She locked the phone and slipped it back into her pocket. "Now," she said, her voice low but even, "I let them have their good life." Susan watched her closely. "And you?" Marilyn turned away from the window, her expression unreadable. "I'll have mine." Back home, the house was quiet again, but no longer empty. The church bell from down the street drifted through the air, slow and solemn. On the dining table sat a small stack of documents tied neatly with twine. Her revised will, bank papers, property titles. The box beside it was labeled simply "Final." She adjusted the knot, making sure it was tight. Then she smoothed her hand over the top as if closing a chapter. Her phone lit up again with another photo from Jason's party. Guests laughing, Emily holding a glass of champagne, the caption tagged, "Ah, blessed and full." Marilyn stared at it for a long time, her expression calm, almost tender. Then she turned the phone face down, extinguishing the glow. The snow outside thickened, cloaking the street in silence. She reached for her mug of tea, tracing the rim with her fingertip. "Traveling," she murmured, repeating her email aloud, and smiled to herself. Only this time, it wasn't a lie. She was traveling, just not anywhere they'd follow. The first Monday of the new year arrived cold and brittle, the sky stretched pale as porcelain. Marilyn sat in Angela Kerr's office once again, a cup of coffee cooling untouched on the desk between them. The hum of the heater filled the space like a distant heartbeat. Angela's glasses reflected the computer screen as she typed the final lines. "All right," she said, voice crisp. "We are now officially filed. The county will timestamp everything this morning." Marilyn nodded, Her gloved hands folded in her lap. She could feel the pen's weight in her purse, the same pen she'd signed with, the one that didn't run out of ink. Angela printed 2 copies and slid them across the desk. To confirm, the primary beneficiary is now the East Marion Youth Center Scholarship Fund, correct? Yes, Marilyn said quietly. It helped Jason once, when he was little. It's time it helps someone else. Angela looked up, assessing her. And your son? You're sure about the heirloom limitation? Marilyn smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held its own sadness. Yes, it's something only he'll understand. Angela set her pen down, leaning back. You're remarkable, Mrs. Grant. Most people rewrite their wills out of bitterness. You're rewriting yours out of clarity. Clarity can sting too, Marilyn said. But it stings less than regret. Angela gave a short nod. I'll courier 1 copy to the clerk's office today. Keep your signed duplicate safe. Paper doesn't lie. Marilyn stood, buttoning her coat. I've learned that truth needs an audience, even if it's the future. When she stepped outside, the city air bit at her cheeks. She drew her scarf tighter and walked to her car with slow, deliberate steps. The envelope under her arm felt heavier than paper. It felt like closure. That afternoon, back home, Marilyn sat at her kitchen table beside a small, weathered lunch pail, red with a chipped Ghostbusters decal across the front. Jason's from 2nd grade. She remembered packing it every morning. Peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally, an apple, and a folded napkin with a doodle just for him. She opened it now, the hinges creaking softly. Inside, she placed a handwritten note on her monogrammed stationery. You once told me you'd buy me the biggest turkey in the world. You did better than that. You made me strong enough to never need one. Love, Mom. She closed the latch with a soft click and set the lunch pail atop her will folder. Then, methodically, she began the preservation ritual Angela had suggested. She slipped the original will into a large envelope, sealed it with care, and addressed it to herself. The pen's nib scratched faintly. Her name, her proof. Mail it to your own address, Angela had said. When it arrives stamped, that seal becomes your witness. Marilyn bundled up and walked the half-block to the blue mailbox near the corner. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and salt from the treated roads. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then slid the envelope through the slot. The metallic clunk echoed deeper than she expected. Walking home, she felt lighter. Later that evening, Susan stopped by with a grocery bag of soup and a bottle of red wine. The church ladies insisted I deliver sustenance to the architect of vengeance, she announced. Marilyn laughed softly. You make it sound dramatic. It is, Susan said, plopping the bag on the counter. You just buried the sword. That's the dramatic part. Marilyn poured 2 glasses of wine. No sword, just ink. Susan grinned, tapping her glass against Marilyn's. Ink cuts cleaner. They sat together in the living room, the glow from a single lamp warming the space. Marilyn handed Susan a manila envelope marked Copy Vapor 2. This stays with you, she said, in case something happens. Susan frowned playfully. You planning something scandalous? Just being thorough. And Reverend Thomas? He'll get his own copy tomorrow. People trust clergy more than paperwork. Susan took the envelope, studying her friend. You really did it. I did, Marilyn said, her voice quiet, resolute. And I didn't have to raise my voice once. For a while they sat in companionable silence, the kind that only old friends could share. The clock ticked softly. The snow outside muffled the world. Then Susan leaned back and smiled. So now what? Marilyn rose, humming under her breath as she tidied the table, an old tune Jason used to sing in the back seat on long drives. She caught herself halfway through, the melody fading into a whisper. Now, she said, turning off the lamp. I wait. Susan nodded, finishing her wine. You buried the sword. Now you wait. Marilyn smiled faintly, watching the snow drift against the window. The house was small, quiet, unpretentious. Yet tonight, it felt like a fortress built on paper and patience. As the last of the light flickered out, her gaze lingered on the lunch pail by the door, glinting dully under the street lamp's glow. Its weight was small, its message not at all. Marilyn was pruning the last of her houseplants when the doorbell rang. The January afternoon light was thin and blue, filtering through lace curtains that trembled with each gust of wind. She wasn't expecting anyone. Susan never knocked, and Reverend Thomas always called first. When she opened the door, Jason stood there with Emily behind him, both wrapped in sleek coats that didn't look made for weather, just for photos. Jason smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Hey, Mom. Thought we'd stop by. Surprise visit. Marilyn blinked. Well, you certainly did that. She stepped aside, gesturing them in. Come on, get out of the cold. Emily stepped across the threshold, her perfume cutting through the faint scent of lemon cleaner. Her gaze swept the living room before she'd even taken off her gloves. Wow, she said, her tone bright but brittle. It's quaint. Jason laughed lightly, as though that made it better. Still looks the same, huh? Marilyn smiled politely. It's home. They wandered in like buyers at an open house, not visitors. Emily trailed her manicured fingers along the wall, checking for dust. Jason looked around with narrowed eyes as though calculating square footage. The carpet's held up, he said absently, tapping it with his shoe. Marilyn clasped her hands in front of her, the same calm mask she'd perfected years ago when bill collectors used to call. Coffee? She asked. That'd be great, Jason said, already halfway down the hall. Emily didn't respond. She was scrolling through her phone, thumb moving in practiced rhythm. Marilyn went to the kitchen, her movements unhurried. She took her time grinding the beans, listening to the familiar sounds, the grinder's whir, the kettle's sigh, the faint hum of her old refrigerator. It grounded her. By the time she carried the tray into the living room, Jason was examining the framed photos on the bookshelf. Still got these up, huh? He said, lifting one of him in his high school graduation gown. I like remembering good years, Marilyn said, setting the tray down. Emily perched on the edge of the couch. So, Mom, she began, tapping her screen, we were talking the other night and, well, Jason's just concerned that this house is getting to be a lot for you to manage. Aren't you? Marilyn poured the coffee, her hand steady. Not really. I'm quite comfortable here. Jason sat across from her, leaning forward. It's just, you're by yourself. The winters are rough. We found a few places. Really nice condos near Carmel. Heated garages, fitness centers, elevators. Marilyn smiled faintly. Sounds like a hotel. Emily gave a sharp little laugh. In a good way. You deserve luxury at this stage. She angled her phone toward Marilyn. See? Look at this one. Sunroom, walking trails, a shuttle to the grocery store. Jason nodded earnestly. It'd be safer. Easier for everyone. Marilyn looked at the listing on the screen. A sleek beige condo with granite counters and identical patio chairs. You'd think they'd come with identical people too, she murmured. Jason frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She met his gaze evenly. It means I've lived a full life in this house, Jason. I raised a son here. I don't need an elevator to remember how to climb stairs. Emily exchanged a glance with him. We're just trying to help, she said, her voice soft but edged. I know, Marilyn said, her tone disarmingly gentle. And I appreciate it. She lifted her cup. Coffee? Jason took his, muttering thanks. Emily didn't. For a few minutes, the room was filled only with the sound of sipping and the ticking wall clock. Jason finally broke the silence. "You'd be more comfortable in a senior condo, right?" Marilyn smiled again, small, precise. "Very comfortable." Jason leaned back, satisfied, mistaking agreement for surrender. Emily, still scrolling, said, "I'll send over some links tonight." Marilyn nodded politely. "You do that." When they left 20 minutes later, their words were all polite noise, promises to check in soon and make plans. Jason kissed her cheek distractedly before heading to the car. Emily was already talking into her phone, her voice fading into the cold. Marilyn stood at the doorway, watching their SUV reverse down the narrow drive. Their taillights cut through the snow like two red warnings. She closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The quiet returned, whole and welcome. Then she began to laugh, softly at first, then fuller, freer. She pressed a hand to her mouth, surprised by the sound. She walked through the house, tracing her fingers along the walls they'd critiqued. Each nick, each faded patch of paint, told a story. Her story. On the dining table, her sealed copy of the will sat beneath the soft glow of a lamp. She picked it up, tapping the edge against her palm, then set it down again with care. "Very comfortable," she repeated under her breath, smiling. Outside, the snow fell heavier, cloaking the street until the world beyond her window disappeared. From somewhere deep in the house, the pipes, perhaps, or memory itself, came a low, steady hum, as if the walls were agreeing. And for the first time, Marilyn didn't feel small inside her home. She felt sovereign. The next morning dawned sharp and white, sunlight glancing off the snow like broken glass. Marilyn dressed with quiet precision, wool slacks, pressed blouse, the same gray coat she'd worn to Angela's office. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as though she were preparing for something sacred rather than legal. The folder on the kitchen table waited like a sealed truth. She tucked it under her arm, slipped on her gloves, and stepped into the cold. At the Marion County Clerk's office, the lobby was a mix of muted chatter and the smell of paper dust. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Marilyn took her place in line behind a young man filling out a marriage license and a woman renewing a business permit. When her turn came, she slid the revocation form and notarized statement across the counter. "Power of attorney withdrawal," she said calmly. The clerk glanced at the papers, stamping each one with practiced rhythm. "All in order, ma'am. You'll get the certified copy by mail in a few days." Marilyn nodded, offering a small smile. "That's perfectly fine. I'm patient." Angela Kerr met her an hour later at the notary's desk in the courthouse annex. Her sharp eyes flicked across the paperwork. "Everything checks out. You're airtight now," she said, adding her signature in one clean motion. "No one can move money, property, or paperwork in your name without your consent." Marilyn watched the ink dry. "That's all I wanted," she said. Angela gave her a knowing look. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It feels fair." Angela smiled faintly. Fair and final are often the same thing. By the time Marilyn returned home, her phone was buzzing with a message from Jason. "Jason, found the perfect builder for the Carmel condo idea. Just need your signature on a few loan papers. Nothing major. Shouldn't take 5 minutes." She stared at the screen, the corners of her mouth tightening into something that wasn't quite a smile. Her thumbs moved slowly as she typed. "Marilyn, no." A few seconds passed. Then the dots appeared. Jason typing, stopping, typing again. Finally, his reply. "Jason, what?" "It's just a formality. You're making this harder than it has to be." Marilyn set the phone down, poured herself a cup of coffee, and took a sip before answering. "Marilyn, I'm not signing anything for your convenience anymore." Her pulse remained steady. The coffee was warm, rich. It tasted like control. 10 minutes later, the phone rang, Emily's number flashing bright. Marilyn let it ring once before answering. "Marilyn?" Emily said sharply, skipping pleasantries. "Jason's upset. You're being unreasonable. We're trying to secure your future, and you're acting independent?" Marilyn offered. "Selfish," Emily snapped. Marilyn smiled faintly, her tone feather light. Finally, there was a stunned pause on the other end, then a sharp exhale and the click of disconnection. The silence afterward was pure relief. An hour later, a notification blinked. A message from Susan. "Susan. Heard the storm finally hit your house. Proud of you, babe." Attached image. It was a meme. An old painting of a woman surrounded by flames, sitting serenely at a table. The caption read, "Peace is power." Marilyn laughed softly, almost choking on her sip of coffee. She saved the image to her phone, staring at it longer than she meant to. She stood, moved to the window, and looked out at her street. Snow blanketed everything, softening edges, swallowing footprints. The world felt freshly erased. For the first time in years, no one else's decisions held weight over her life. The power that used to live in other people's hands now rested quietly in her own. She reached for a pen on the counter, twirling it absently between her fingers. "Signatures," she whispered. "Funny things." Then she set it down beside her mug and smiled. Because for once, silence wasn't something done to her. It was something she owned. And outside, as a gust of wind rattled her mailbox, Marilyn thought of Jason's text and felt not guilt, but gravity. The kind that comes right before a storm breaks. The knock came just after dusk, a hard, hurried rhythm against the front door. Marilyn had been reading by the fire, the pages of her book glowing amber in the lamplight. She closed it quietly, marked her page, and waited. 3 more knocks. Faster this time. When she opened the door, Jason stood there, collar up against the wind, his breath visible in the freezing air. He wasn't smiling. "Can I come in?" Marilyn stepped aside. "You already did." He brushed past her, snowflakes clinging to his shoulders, and headed straight for the kitchen table. From his leather satchel, he pulled out a folder, thick, official-looking, bristling with tabs. He spread it open like a salesman laying out his pitch. "Here," he said briskly. "Just sign these. I'll handle the rest." Marilyn stayed standing. "What are they?" "Refinance forms," he said, almost too quickly. "We're restructuring to build the second property. An investment thing. It's simple, really. The bank needs your co-signature because your name's still attached to the first mortgage from years ago. You won't owe a dime, I promise." He smiled, tight, rehearsed. It was the same expression he'd worn the day he told her she didn't need to bring food to Thanksgiving anymore because everything's handled. Marilyn took a slow breath. "Tea?" Jason blinked. "What?" "Peppermint. You always liked it after dinner." He hesitated, impatience flashing in his eyes. "Sure, fine. But can we get through this first?" She moved to the stove, set the kettle on, and let the sound of water fill the pause between them. Jason shuffled papers, tapping a pen against the table, the tempo sharp and anxious. "You'll be helping us qualify," he said, glancing at her over his shoulder. "Interest rates are brutal right now, and we can't close without your signature. The bank wants family equity. See, they already pre-approved it, but it expires Friday." The kettle began to whisper, the first note of a boil. Marilyn opened a cabinet, found 2 mugs, and said quietly, "So what happens if I don't sign?" Jason frowned. "Then we don't qualify." She turned, her gaze steady. "Then maybe you shouldn't qualify." The words landed like ice cracking. Jason's jaw tightened. "Mom, come on. This isn't about you. It's logistics. You're not even part of the debt. Your name's just leverage." "Leverage?" She rolled the word around like something sour. That's what I am now? He groaned, rubbing his temples. This is exactly why I didn't want to drag you into it. You always overthink things. It's a signature, not a betrayal. The kettle began to whistle. She lifted it from the heat, the sound swelling before it cut to silence. Peppermint? She asked again. He didn't answer. His pen tapped louder. Do you even know how much stress Emily and I are under? We're building a future. For the family. You're supposed to want that. She poured the water over the tea bag, the scent of mint rising into the air. I did want that, she said softly. For decades. Jason's voice sharpened. Then prove it. Marilyn carried the steaming cup to the table and placed it gently in front of him. I just did. He pushed the cup aside, his movements jerky now. You're unbelievable. You've had it easy for years, and now when I ask for one thing, one simple thing, you decide to make it difficult. Her voice stayed calm, almost tender. Jason, if your success depends on my name, maybe it isn't success. He froze. The pen slipped from his hand. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said, sitting across from him. You're not a boy needing help with homework anymore. You're a man asking your mother to sign away her peace for your comfort. And I've given enough of both. The air between them thickened, brittle as frost. Jason stood abruptly, gathering the papers into a disheveled pile. After everything I've done for you, he snapped. Unbelievable. He shoved the folder back into his bag, his voice rising. You think this house, this little life, just happened? I worked for this stability. I brought you up with me. Marilyn took a slow sip of her tea, eyes steady over the rim. I remember who did the raising. Jason's breath hitched. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to her. For a heartbeat. The weight of everything unsaid hovered in the air. Then he exhaled sharply, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to shake the picture frames. Silence returned like a sigh. Marilyn waited until the sound of his car engine faded before she looked at the untouched mug across the table. The peppermint had cooled, its steam gone. She took another sip from her own cup, savoring the calm. The taste was clean, bright, unshakable. Then she gathered the unsigned folder from where he'd left it and set it neatly on the counter beside the kettle. Her hand hovered over it for a moment, then pulled away. The folder I didn't touch, she murmured to herself. Outside, the snow had started again, soft and steady. Somewhere down the street, the wind carried the faint echo of a car door slamming, distant, angry, powerless. Marilyn smiled, turned off the light, and let the quiet fold around her like a quilt. And for the first time in years, she realized not signing could feel just as powerful as writing her name. The skyline of downtown Indianapolis shimmered with early spring haze as Jason leaned back in the buttery leather chair of his financial advisor's office. The blinds were half drawn, slicing sunlight into neat, sterile stripes across the floor. He scrolled absently on his phone while Martin, his advisor of 7 years, typed away behind a monitor. So, Jason said, smiling confidently. Once Mom passes, we're estimating a conservative transfer, right? Home equity, pension, a few annuities. Should keep the line of credit strong. Martin's typing slowed. His brows furrowed. Jason. Hold on a moment. Jason's foot tapped against the leg of his chair. What's wrong? Martin turned the screen toward him. It looks like her estate plan was amended last quarter. Your name isn't listed anywhere on the primary beneficiary page. Jason blinked. That can't be right. I double-checked the county filings, Martin said gently. It's valid and notarized. Someone named East Marion Youth Center Scholarship Fund is the designated beneficiary. Jason's laughter came out sharp, almost brittle. That's impossible. I'm her only son. Martin hesitated. Families do this sometimes. People change their wills for tax reasons, for legacy planning. Legacy planning? Jason's voice cracked into a snarl. She wouldn't do this. She's probably been misled. Some lawyer or church friend getting in her head. Martin straightened his tie. You might want to speak with her attorney directly. Jason stood abruptly, gripping his briefcase. Oh, I intend to. Angela Kerr's office smelled faintly of cedar and ink. The receptionist looked up as Jason burst through the glass doors, his steps too loud for the soft-carpeted lobby. Jason Grant for Angela Kerr, he said sharply. The receptionist, unruffled, smiled. Do you have an appointment? I don't need one. Before she could respond, Angela appeared in the doorway, unflinching, calm, the same gray suit pressed into crisp perfection. Mr. Grant, she said evenly, how can I help you? Jason stepped forward, his voice tight. You changed my mother's will. Angela didn't flinch. Your mother updated her will? I executed it according to her wishes. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's old. Lonely. You must have talked her into this. Angela's mouth twitched, the smallest hint of amusement. Mrs. Grant is one of the most lucid, deliberate clients I've ever had. You should give her more credit. Jason slammed a hand on her desk. Tell me what she left me. Angela folded her hands, calm as still water. Confidential. Attorney-client privilege. You'll be informed when appropriate. This is insane. His voice echoed off the glass walls. I'm her son. Angela stood, meeting him eye to eye. And she's an adult. One with rights you apparently don't respect. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came. Angela's tone softened, almost pitying. You'd do better to call her than storm my office. Some stories, Mr. Grant, aren't yours to edit. He stared at her, breathing hard, then turned and stormed out. The door's closing click sounded final. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, scrolling furiously through Marilyn's Facebook page. There has to be something, she muttered. Photos, posts, anything about this youth center. Jason paced behind her, phone in hand, unreadable fury tightening his jaw. She's not doing this. I'll talk to her. She's just trying to make a point. Emily squinted. Wait. What's this? On Susan Albright's page, a new photo had gone up just an hour earlier. It showed Marilyn standing outside the East Marion Youth Center, a modest brick building with a new brass plaque glinting under the sun. In her hand were a set of keys, her smile gentle but triumphant. The caption read, Some people build legacies quietly. Emily's eyes widened. Jason, she's giving it all away. Jason's phone buzzed in his hand, a number he knew by heart. Without thinking, he answered. Mom, he said, his tone already sharp. What the hell are you doing? On the other end came only silence for a moment, then her voice, steady, calm, almost kind. Finishing a story you never let me tell. Before he could reply, the line went dead. Jason stared at the phone, the hum of the disconnected call buzzing in his ear. Emily whispered, What did she say? He looked up, his face pale, the room suddenly too quiet. Nothing, he said. Absolutely nothing. But deep down, he knew better. It wasn't nothing. It was the sound of her final word, written, sealed, and already beyond his reach. The knock this time was soft, almost careful, like the sound of someone asking permission they didn't deserve. Marilyn looked up from the jigsaw puzzle spread across her kitchen table. The pieces were of a winter landscape, icy pond, leafless trees, a frozen bench, and she was halfway through connecting the sky. The knock came again, tentative but insistent. When she opened the door, Jason stood on the porch, snow dusting his coat shoulders, Emily a step behind him holding a gift bag she hadn't even bothered to tape shut. Mom, Jason said, his voice quiet but strained. Can we come in? Marilyn hesitated for the briefest moment before stepping aside. Of course. The warmth of the house seemed to press against them as they entered, the faint smell of cinnamon and coffee hanging in the air. Emily's eyes darted around like she was measuring how small everything felt. Jason's were fixed on the floor. Marilyn motioned to the couch. Have a seat. I'll open some wine. Wine's great, Emily said quickly, her voice higher than usual, brittle at the edges. Marilyn poured 3 glasses, steady, graceful, deliberate, and handed them out. Jason's hand brushed hers, his fingers cold, his grip fleeting. So, she said lightly. What brings you by? It's not exactly Christmas. Jason exhaled. Mom, listen. I didn't come to argue. I just want to understand what's going on. Emily smiled tightly. We've all been emotional. Maybe things got misinterpreted. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. Misinterpreted? Emily looked at Jason, then back at Marilyn. The will. The changes. We just want to talk about it. You know, make sure it's really what you want. Jason leaned forward. We're worried. You've been under a lot of influence lately. Susan, that lawyer, Reverend Thomas. People can plant ideas. Marilyn swirled her wine, watching the liquid turn in slow, lazy circles. Is that what you think happened? Jason's voice softened. Mom, you've always been generous. You've always said family comes first. I did, she said, setting her glass down. Until family stopped showing up. Emily shifted uncomfortably. That's not fair. We've just been busy. You know how work gets. Marilyn smiled faintly. Work is busy. Family is supposed to be loud, not absent. The silence that followed was taut enough to hum. Emily reached for her glass, her hand trembling slightly. I always admired your strength, she said, forcing warmth into her tone. You did everything on your own. That's inspiring. Marilyn studied her, then nodded once. Strength is what people mistake for silence. They think if you don't shout, you must be fine. Jason leaned forward again, the mask of calm cracking. Mom, we were just trying to plan for the future, that's all. The houses, the investments. It was supposed to make things easier for you. Marilyn's eyes softened, but her voice didn't waver. Then you should have remembered the past. It was never easy for either of us. And I never asked you to fix that with money. Jason looked away, jaw tight. Emily's eyes darted toward the side table where a manila folder rested beside the lamp. What's that? She asked. Marilyn followed her gaze. Not what you think. Emily blinked. Maybe we could take a look. Clear the air? Marilyn stood before she could finish, walking slowly to the hall closet. She pulled down a thick photo album, its leather cover worn at the corners, and carried it back to them. Jason frowned. What's this? My documents, she said evenly, setting it on his lap. He opened it hesitantly. Inside were photos. Jason as a child in a threadbare coat, holding a paper snowflake. Jason asleep on her shoulder in a hospital waiting room. Birthday dinners lit by candles stuck into cupcakes from the dollar store. Each page was a ledger of love and survival, not finance. Emily's mouth tightened. This isn't what we... No, Marilyn interrupted, her voice low but cutting through the room like a clean blade. It's not what you came for, but it's what's left for you. Jason closed the album, his hands trembling slightly. Mom, this isn't fair. Marilyn met his eyes, unflinching. Fair would have been remembering who built the life you're trying to refinance. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, wind swept against the windows, carrying a faint, lonely whistle. Emily stood first, setting her glass down without finishing it. We should go? Jason rose slowly, still holding the album. For a second, he looked like he might say something, something real, something soft, but the words never came. He placed the album back on the coffee table and turned for the door. Marilyn walked them to the threshold. "Drive safe," she said gently. Jason hesitated, glancing back one last time. "Mom, you don't have to do this." She smiled, serene. "I already did." The door closed behind them with a soft click. She stood there for a moment, listening to the crunch of tires fading down the snowy street. The house felt warmer now, lighter somehow. Marilyn picked up the photo album, ran her fingers over the worn cover and whispered, almost to herself, "You came for paper. I gave you proof." Then she poured herself another glass of wine and went back to her puzzle, connecting two pieces of the sky. Outside, the wind rose again, like applause in the distance. For 3 days, the phone rang like a stubborn ghost. Morning, noon, and night. Jason's name lit the screen again and again, the little vibration rattling across the kitchen counter like a wasp trapped under glass. Each time, Marilyn glanced at it, then turned the phone face down. The silence that followed was its own reply. On the fourth morning, she found an email instead. Subject: clearing the air. The message was polished, like Emily herself. Polite punctuation, hollow warmth. "Marilyn, we're sorry if things got heated the other night. Jason feels terrible. We just want what's best for everyone. Of course you're entitled to your choices, but please understand how upsetting it's been for him. Families are supposed to stick together, especially after everything we've done to support you. Maybe we can reset and start fresh. Love, Emily, and Jason." Marilyn read it twice, then closed her laptop without replying. The kettle whistled behind her. She poured the hot water over her tea bag and smiled faintly as the color bled into the cup. Calm, spreading through heat. She had no words left to waste on people who used apologies as leverage. By the weekend, the sky had cleared, and Reverend Thomas's voice came through the answering machine, warm and unhurried. "Marilyn, we're hosting a youth outreach night at the community hall next Friday. A few of the teens have been asking about your scholarship program, the one tied to the youth center. Would you be willing to share your story? Nothing formal, just from the heart." She'd replayed the message 3 times before calling back. The church hall was alive with sound, sneakers squeaking on linoleum, laughter echoing through the space that smelled faintly of cocoa and chalk dust. The folding chairs were mismatched, the air humming with the warmth of young bodies and untamed energy. Marilyn stood near the podium, holding a note card she didn't plan to use. Reverend Thomas smiled from the front row, his hands folded over his knee. "You can start whenever you're ready," he said softly. She nodded and stepped forward. The chatter quieted. "Hi," she began, voice steady. "My name's Marilyn Grant." A few of the teens nodded. They'd seen her photo on the youth center's wall. "I was a single mother for most of my life," she continued. "It wasn't planned, but not much in life is. I worked long hours, missed sleep, missed meals. But I didn't miss a day loving my son." Her gaze drifted toward the back of the room, to the faint outline of herself reflected in the window. "Back then," she said, "I thought love meant giving everything you had, even the parts you needed to keep. I thought silence was sacrifice. Turns out, it was just quiet." The room stilled. "I don't regret raising him alone," she said, her voice softening. "What I regret is teaching him that love didn't have boundaries. I let him believe I'd always be the safety net, even when he stopped looking down to see me." A girl in the front row sniffled. A boy whispered something to his friend. "She's real." Marilyn smiled gently. "I tell you all this because I want you to remember. Family isn't who you owe. It's who sees you standing, even when you've fallen apart." Reverend Thomas bowed his head. The teens clapped. Not loud, not performative, but in that genuine, careful way of people who've just learned something they'll remember. Marilyn exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all week. The applause wasn't for her revenge, it was for her survival. That night, she came home to a blinking red light on her answering machine. One new message. She pressed play. Jason's voice filled the room, raw, cracked at the edges. "I hope you're happy, Mom." No greeting, no sign-off, just that. The silence after it was colder than the wind outside. Marilyn stood for a long time, her reflection faint in the darkened window. Her tea sat forgotten on the counter, steam fading into nothing. Finally, she walked to the machine, pressed save, and turned out the light. Her house was quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but earned. And as she climbed into bed, the echo of her son's voice lingered like a benediction she no longer needed to answer. She smiled into the dark. "Finally," she whispered, "so am I." The March wind carried a hint of thaw, melting the last ridges of ice along the sidewalks as sunlight spilled over the East Marion Youth Center. The front steps were lined with folding chairs and paper streamers, the kind of modest celebration only a small-town paper would cover, and yet to Marilyn, it felt like a cathedral. A banner fluttered above the doorway. Community Roots Scholarship, in honor of Marilyn Grant. She stood near the entrance, wearing her good coat, her hair neatly pinned, the silver in it catching the light. Children she'd never met ran across the lot, chasing a stray balloon. Reverend Thomas stood nearby with his hands folded and eyes proud. "Big day," he said, glancing at her. Marilyn smiled softly. "Bigger than it looks." Susan arrived moments later, bundled in her heavy church parka, cheeks flushed pink. "I nearly cried at the sign," she said, wiping at her eyes anyway. "They spelled your name right even. Miracles do happen." Marilyn laughed, the sound warm and real. "Don't start with the tears. We're supposed to look dignified." "Dignified?" Susan scoffed. "You gave away half your life's work and they're giving you a plaque. I think tears are allowed." The ceremony began with a small crowd. Volunteers, parents, a few local officials. A young girl in a yellow coat stepped up to the microphone and began reading a note from one of the scholarship recipients. "This grant means I can go to community college this fall. I didn't think people like me had chances like this. Thank you for believing in us before we even met." Applause rippled through the group, quiet but heartfelt. Marilyn's throat tightened. She kept her gaze steady, hands clasped in front of her. Susan leaned close, whispering, This is what storytelling is, Marilyn. You didn't need to speak a word. You just rewrote the ending." Marilyn's lips curved. "Maybe I just learned the right audience." The crowd broke into applause again as the mayor presented her with a framed certificate. Cameras flashed. For once, she didn't shy away. Across town, Jason scrolled through the Indianapolis Star on his phone at his office desk, coffee going cold beside his keyboard. The headline hit him like a slap. "Widows' Generosity funds scholarships for local youth." Marilyn grants lifelong savings to support East Marion students. Below the headline was a photo. His mother, smiling in that calm, knowing way, standing in front of the youth center with a plaque in her hands. He read it twice, the word swimming. Emily looked up from her laptop across the table. "What is it?" Jason turned the screen toward her without speaking. She read silently, her expression tightening. "You've got to be kidding me." He said nothing. Emily set her coffee down a little too hard. "We needed that money." Jason didn't answer. His throat worked, but no sound came. He scrolled to the last line of the article, the quote from Reverend Thomas. "Marilyn believed giving is louder than taking. Her story will feed generations." He closed the article, the faint reflection of his face on the black screen older than he remembered. That evening, Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, the framed certificate leaning against a vase of fresh tulips Susan had brought. The light outside had gone soft and gold. She'd already mailed a handwritten thank you note to Reverend Thomas and another to the youth center director, neatly folded in stationery embossed with her initials. Now, a new document sat in front of her, her advance directive, printed on thick paper. She read it carefully, line by line, her pen poised but steady. At the section for emergency contact, she paused, then drew a single line through the space beneath it. Empty, deliberate, final. She signed her name beneath the witness line, the ink soaking into the paper. Angela would have approved. The precision, the closure. When she finished, she leaned back, letting the quiet hum of the refrigerator fill the room. Her laptop pinged, a confirmation email. She opened it and smiled faintly. Order confirmed. Custom mug. Just eat, don't start a story. She closed the laptop and stood, stretching slightly. The window reflected her faintly. Silver hair, soft eyes, a woman who had made peace, not by forgiving, but by finishing. On the counter, her phone buzzed once, a notification from the Star's social media page, the same article now gathering hundreds of comments. She didn't open it. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, lifted it toward the quiet kitchen, and murmured, "To silence that finally speaks." Outside, the sky darkened to deep indigo. The world moved on, unaware that a woman in a modest house had just rewritten the balance sheet of her life. And somewhere in another part of the city, her son sat staring at a headline he couldn't undo. The bouquet arrived on a Wednesday morning. No card, just the kind of crisp white paper florists use when they don't want to give away the sender. Marilyn found it on her porch beside the mail, the blooms vivid against the dull gray steppe. Deep orange tulips, pale daisies, and one single white rose standing taller than the rest. The arrangement smelled faintly of citrus and clean water. She carried it inside, her hands trembling just enough to feel it. The tag was small and handwritten, not printed. The ink had bled a little from the cold. "Thank you for giving us a future." Beneath it, a name she didn't recognize, Hannah, followed by the youth center's logo scribbled in the corner. Marilyn stood at the counter for a long moment, reading the note again. Then she set it down gently beside her coffee cup and reached for a vase. The kitchen filled with color as she trimmed the stems one by one, the sound of scissors crisp in the still air. When she placed the bouquet on the table, sunlight broke through the window and caught the petals, scattering gold across her papers. She exhaled, slow and steady. It wasn't from Jason. She'd known that the instant she saw it. It was from the world she'd chosen instead. And somehow, that made it the most honest gift she'd ever received. Later that week, Susan stopped by, scarf trailing behind her like a flag in the wind. She stepped into the kitchen, sniffed the air, and let out a low whistle. "Well, someone's admirer has good taste." "They're from the youth center," Marilyn said, her tone casual, though the smile on her lips gave her away. Susan picked up the card, squinting at it. "Thank you for giving us a future." God, that's better than a Hallmark movie ending. Marilyn laughed softly. "I don't think I've ever been anyone's future before. It's strange." "Not strange," Susan said, setting the card back down. "Deserved." They moved to the living room, where boxes sat stacked near the door. Inside one were plates wrapped in newspaper, a few serving bowls, and a tea set that had belonged to Marilyn's mother. Susan nudged one box with her foot. "You moving again, or is this the prelude to another grand act of defiance?" "Neither," Marilyn said, taping another corner shut. "Just downsizing. The foster care kitchen program Reverend Thomas runs needs supplies. These will actually get used." Susan tilted her head, impressed. You're giving away your family china? Marilyn smiled faintly. It's not family anymore, it's porcelain. Might as well feed someone. Susan laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. You're haunting them, and you're still alive. Good, Marilyn said, her voice calm and even. Ghosts have peace. The living always want something. They sat quietly for a moment, the ticking clock between them filling the space that used to be guilt. Across town, Emily sat at her laptop, fury radiating off her in waves. She's trending again, she hissed, scrolling through local posts of the scholarship event, photos of the youth center, quotes from Reverend Thomas. Everyone's calling her an inspiration. Jason didn't look up from the couch. He was watching the news on mute, though his eyes weren't really seeing it. Jason, Emily pressed, you're just going to sit there? She made you look like you never existed. He finally glanced at her. Maybe that's what she wanted. Emily's voice dropped. You could at least tell her how cruel this is. He stared back at the TV, jaw tight. I already did. Emily's fingers hovered over her laptop keys. Fine, I'll block her. She doesn't deserve access to our lives. She went to her social media page and clicked block. A red error message popped up. User not found. Her mouth fell open. She unfriended me first. Jason didn't answer. His reflection on the blank screen looked smaller than the man she married. That night, Marilyn wrapped the last of the china in tissue paper and labeled the box. For the kids who eat with joy. She set it by the door with the others and turned back toward the flowers. The tulips were opening now, their petals curling outward like tongues of flame. She sat down beside them, tracing the rim of her mug, still warm from her evening tea, and watched the light shift across the table. Her phone vibrated once. A notification. She didn't have to look to know what it was. Jason hadn't called in over a week. She suspected he never would again. And that, she realized, was its own piece. She reached for the little white rose, its edges soft, still cold from the morning air. She pressed her fingertip against one petal until it bent but didn't break. You're welcome, she whispered to the empty room. Outside, a single snowflake drifted down from a bruised sky, melting on the glass before it could stick. It left no trace. But she saw it anyway, and smiled. The letter began with no greeting. Marilyn had written Jason at the top 3 times already, each in slightly different pen pressure, and each time she had drawn a slow line through it. The 4th version started with a single word instead. Thank you. Her handwriting was still elegant, a relic from the years when people took time to form words rather than send them. The ink moved easily across the page as she wrote, Thank you for the quiet. It's steadier than the noise ever was. Thank you for reminding me that peace doesn't always come from being understood. Sometimes it comes from walking away before you start explaining again. And thank you for the clarity, even if it arrived wrapped in distance. She paused, listening to the faint pop and hiss of her fireplace. The paper felt warm against her hand, as if it were already aware of what came next. Marilyn continued, her words more fluid now, almost conversational. You taught me, without meaning to, that silence isn't punishment. It's preservation. There are stories I wanted to tell you, not to make you feel guilty, but so you'd remember where you came from. But maybe it's better this way. You'll find your own version of them one day. She signed only her first name, the way she used to on notes in his lunchbox. Love, Marilyn. When she was done, she folded the page once, then again, until it fit neatly in her palm. The fire crackled when she opened the grate. The warmth of it brushed her face, bright and alive. She held the letter just long enough to reread the first line one more time. Thank you for the quiet, she whispered. And the clarity. The edge of the paper caught the flame easily, curling and darkening at the corners until her handwriting glowed briefly gold, then disappeared. Ash drifted upward, a soft gray snowfall that vanished before it landed. She sat back, letting the fire's heat wrap around her. For the first time in months, there was no heaviness in her chest, just the quiet hum of something finished. The following evening, the house filled with the sound of laughter. Marilyn stood at her stove, stirring a pot of chili big enough for a crowd. Around her, voices wove through the air. Women from the youth center, all single mothers, all full of life and exhaustion in equal measure. A toddler toddled between knees, clutching a cookie. Someone turned on an old Motown playlist. Laughter burst again as someone spilled cider on the floor. Marilyn turned, ladle in hand. "Whoever brought those rolls," she said, "you've ruined all other bread for me." "That was me," called one of the women from the folding table. "My mother's recipe. You can have it, but only if you teach me that pie crust trick you bragged about." Marilyn laughed, an unguarded, bright sound. "Deal." They ate together at her mismatched dining table, passing dishes, telling stories that overlapped and tangled, like a family made from the pieces of others. One of the younger moms, barely 20, her eyes heavy but hopeful, leaned in and said softly, "You know, Ms. Grant, this place feels like home. You make people feel seen." Marilyn blinked, her throat tightening, but she kept her smile. "That's all I ever wanted to be good at." The girl nodded. "You are." As the evening wore on, plates emptied and stories turned to memories. Someone joked about how they'd all need naps by 9 p.m. Marilyn looked around at them, the clatter, the chaos, the joy, and felt something she hadn't in years. Heard, truly heard. After everyone left, she washed the dishes by hand, humming softly. The scent of cinnamon and soap lingered in the air. She dried the last bowl, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned toward the small package sitting on her doorstep. It was from the online shop, brown paper, neat label. She opened it at the kitchen counter, pulling back tissue paper to reveal a ceramic mug, smooth and white. The words on it were printed in clean black script. "Just eat. Don't start a story." Marilyn traced the letters with her fingertip, then poured herself the last of the cider and raised the mug in a small toast. "To the stories I didn't tell," she said quietly, "and to the ones I'm still writing." She took a sip, smiling as the sweet warmth hit her tongue. The fire behind her crackled again, softer now, content. Outside, the night pressed gently against the window panes, full of snow and promise. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, Marilyn didn't think of what she'd lost. She thought of everything she'd fed instead. Snow fell the way it always did at the end of an Indiana winter. Slow, hushed, almost tender. The garden behind the East Marion Youth Center slept beneath a light dusting of white, the wooden benches rimmed with frost. Someone had hung string lights along the fence, their faint yellow glow cutting through the gray. Marilyn walked the narrow path between the raised beds, her boots pressing neat prints into the powder. In a few months, these planters would burst with tomato vines and marigolds, but for now they held only quiet potential. She loved them that way, waiting, patient, unbothered by the cold. Laughter broke across the stillness. A cluster of kids were playing near the swings, bundled in puffy jackets and mismatched gloves. Their joy rose into the air like music. One boy darted past her, chasing a red ball that skidded across the snow. He stopped short to scoop it up, and Marilyn froze for a beat, her breath catching. The boy's coat, faded navy with a missing button and a patch on the elbow, was unmistakable. Jason's old winter coat from 1989. She'd given it to the center months ago, tucked in with other donated clothes, never thinking she'd see it again. The sight of it on another child, smaller shoulders, brighter laugh. Didn't ache the way she expected. It felt right, almost faded, like the past had chosen to warm someone new. The boy looked up and waved. "Hi, Miss Grant." She smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. Watch your step. It's slippery." He nodded solemnly, then went back to his game. From the parking lot, Reverend Thomas waved through the falling snow, his coat collar turned up against the cold. "You're here early," he called out. Marilyn waved back. "Habit." He grinned. "The best kind. Don't stay too long in that wind. You've earned warm coffee and soft chairs." "I'll join you soon," she said, though she didn't move yet. She turned toward the small wooden bench beneath the bare sycamore tree, brushed off a thin layer of snow, and sat down. The world around her had gone muffled, as if holding its breath. Moments later, Susan appeared, cheeks flushed, a takeout tray in her gloved hands. "Found you," she said, handing over a steaming cup. "Half the volunteers think you live out here." Marilyn took the coffee, smiling. "Maybe I do." Susan sat beside her, exhaling a cloud of vapor. "You know, if ghosts really haunt people, they probably start with playgrounds and gardens. Can't imagine a better view." Marilyn chuckled. "You and your ghosts." "You said it yourself," Susan said with a wink. "Ghosts have peace. You've been glowing lately. Must be halfway there." They sat in easy silence for a while, watching the children. The boy in Jason's coat was now helping another child to her feet after a tumble, both of them laughing. Marilyn's chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't pain. It was gratitude, raw and full. "I've told that story in my head 100 times," she said quietly. Susan turned toward her. "Which one?" "The Thanksgiving one." Marilyn smiled faintly. "The one I never got to finish." Susan nudged her arm. "Then tell it. Seems like you've got the perfect audience." Marilyn looked at the kids, at the garden that would bloom again, at the snow that kept falling no matter how much the ground had already taken. She set her coffee aside and began to speak, her voice gentle but sure. "It was the year Jason turned 8, she said. "We couldn't afford a turkey. The oven had broken, so I made mac and cheese on the stove and stuck 2 candles in it. He said it was the best Thanksgiving dinner he'd ever had." A few of the kids nearby had paused their game, inching closer, curious. "I told him someday," she continued, "he'd buy me the biggest turkey in the world. And he looked at me, serious as a judge, and said, 'You won't need one, Mom. You'll already have everything.'" The children giggled softly but listened. Even Susan leaned in, her expression softening. Marilyn looked out at the snow again, her eyes reflecting the shimmer of the string lights. "Turns out, he was right. I don't need a turkey. I just needed to remember what feeding someone really means." The little boy in Jason's coat grinned. "Did he ever get you one?" Marilyn smiled at him, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. "No, but I think I did." The kids laughed, not fully understanding, but that didn't matter. She kept talking, her words flowing easily now. Stories about stubborn hope, about love that outlasted pride, about how silence sometimes says exactly what needs to be heard. And this time, no one interrupted. Even the snow seemed to listen. As the children scattered back to their games and Susan patted her hand, Marilyn leaned back on the bench, the warmth of the coffee seeping into her palms. She looked at the sky, the same shade of soft gray she remembered from that Thanksgiving long ago, and felt the weight of her life settle gently, not heavy, not bitter, just full. "He told me to eat," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Then she smiled, eyes glistening as the children's laughter echoed through the winter air. "So I did," she whispered, "and then I fed the future instead." Snow fell harder now, erasing footprints, softening edges, turning everything, past, present, and forgiveness, into one unbroken white.